We have to quiet our cleverness around that.
I've been bending the rules since third grade.
And I come from the Nike world, which was all about, bring inspiration to people's lives. You have this idea, like, untold stories of creativity. Well, where's that going to take you?
That the purpose of what we're here for is to optimize the resonance and relevance for those we serve.
Once again, don't create magic, create the conditions for magic to happen. What are those things?
Hey man, how are you?
I'm good, and yourself?
Oh man, yeah, I'm really, really good. We were chatting just before, and yeah, I'm really excited for this one. I think it's it's going to be a real good podcast. It's a good opportunity to dive into your crazy journey and equally kind of what motivates you today. And I guess like before we do that, the best way to dive into it is, a little bit of who you are, what you do, and why.
Yeah, I always have to. I'll be open. Like always have a tough time when someone says, "What do you do?" or "Who you are," because at times I'm not sure what who I am or what I'm doing. And I share that just because at the heart for me, I think I'm a deeply curious soul. I'm an introvert by nature. I love adventure. I love being uncomfortable. I know that's not true of many people, but that's my happy place. And I love figuring how things work. Like maybe that's because my mom was an engineer early on, and I think I didn't get those skill sets literally, but I think like understanding how things work is a passion of mine. And so over the years, over the last 30 plus years, I've lived in a variety of different diverse cultures, big billion-dollar behemoth public companies, small private companies, startups, nonprofits. And I think throughout all that, it's just been an amazing learning journey for me. And on a personal level, I live in Ojai, California, which is this idyllic little community just north of LA. We have like 7,000 beautiful souls living here. And I've been with my wife, my amazing, incredible wife, for coming up on 28 years. And we have two beautiful young daughters who are 25 and 23. Oh, and we also have a boatload of animals: horses, dogs, cats, chickens. So it's a bit crazy.
Yeah, like I was looking into your journey, and it's crazy. And where you live now is, oh man, it's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. But I think talking about the journey, let's maybe start out with Scott. Let's start at the very beginning, like because to some people they won't recognize. Like I know I didn't. I picked up on it on a TED talk that you did. So yeah, let's start with Scott.
Yeah, I mean, like the big reveal is my real name is Scott, and I was in third grade. I think there was like 4 or 5 Scotts in the class, and the teacher was like, "We can't do this all school year, so pick a nickname for the year." And most people won't understand this reference because it's dated, but there was this TV show called Gilligan's Island, and I went home after school, watched it, and there was this surfer dude named Duke who washed ashore. And I was like, that's it. I'm going with Duke. I actually tried to change my last name too, but my parents weren't keen on that. So, but I've had Duke since literally third grade, which was like in the early 70s, mid 70s, something like that.
Yeah, man. And what was it like growing up in like the 70s? Like looking at, I guess we'll go on to talk about it a little bit later. But in respect to the global brands you've worked with, how does that kind of period of your kind of journey from the growing up as a teen in the 70s, did that impact you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I was born in '66, and it was a fascinating time. I mean, man was going to the moon. It was like I wanted to be an astronaut, or an astronaut who wore a cowboy hat, as I always like to say. And I grew up on a farm outside of Chicago, which was amazing, and it was just me. I mean, I think there's a lot of great studies now being done on boredom and how beautiful boredom can be, because it just forces you to be creative. And but I also had two. I might have shared this in the talk, but I love to share it whenever I go. I just won the lottery with parents. I feel so fortunate. We pick our friends, we don't pick our parents. And Somehow my sister and I got lucky enough to have two parents that just, I think, nurtured a sense of possibility and rigor and honesty in how we live our lives, and also imperfect in many ways. Like that was the whole thing. Like it's okay to be imperfect. Just be honest in that endeavor. And so that had such a huge impact on me growing up. And I think about it quite a bit. Like growing up on a farm by myself was really magical. I don't think I really appreciated it at the time, but I just had to tap into my own little world for years, and I loved it. You know, I was just hanging out in the barn all day in the hay and making imaginary friends. But I think that level of just being quiet and allowing creativity to emerge was just such a beautiful thing.
And talking of creativity, how did that kind of start? How did the journey, I guess, to working for some of the big global brands that you've went on to work with, such as like Nike, etc. How did that kind of journey begin? And also, that passion for creativity, how did that kind of come out in its initial fruition?
Yeah, so I went to university at this place called University of Vermont, which is in Burlington, Vermont, and I think a couple things. One is I was an economics major and political science major, but I just loved philosophy classes. Like I couldn't get enough of philosophy for whatever reason. And of course, like the college counselor would be like, "What are you going to do with that as a career?" And I'm like, "I have no clue, but I love it. I want to. This stuff fuels me." And I really struggled with economics, and so there I am I'm studying, learning about business, and then yet down the street in the early days, I was watching Ben and Jerry's literally dismantle everything I was learning. I was like, these guys, like I fell in love with them. I was like, look at these guys. Like they seem like they're having a lot of fun, but they're breaking every damn rule I'm learning about in the classroom. And I think that triggered for me at that moment, or it like planted the seed, like, hey, you don't have to settle in business. Like you can find a culture that creates the conditions where there's vibrancy and creativity and fun and culture and community. And so that was a huge piece. And then there was this one moment I was in a philosophy class and the teacher said, hey, write a paper. And it was a critical analysis between Socrates and Plato's Republic.
Oh,
And I remember I went back to my apartment and I was like, I have zero will to do this right now, like zero. And so I popped, I think I opened up a beer, sat down, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a play in modern day times. And Plato and Socrates are going to be in a pub here in Burlington, Vermont, having a conversation about their work. And I remember like it felt so right doing it. I was like, yes, this is to me like I'm expanding boundaries of what is possible, like creatively. I handed it in, and then I kind of freaked out because I was like, God, I just got an F, but I didn't follow the rules. And the teacher gave it back to me saying, like, hey, like, and just thank you. And that was just this reinforcement for me, like, it's okay to break the rules that bind, like, especially if you feel really strongly about something. And so, long story short, when it came time to look for work, I went to school. I was a hockey player. I played a year of hockey in Sweden, came back from Sweden, and talked to a couple friends who were at Nike, and I was like, wow, like these guys are a bunch of mavericks and rebels, and it just felt like Ben and Jerry's, and it was sport, and I love sport. I'm like, let me see if I can grab something there, and that kind of led me into the world of the big swoosh, and I was there for almost 16 years. This was 1990. I joined Nike, which was a golden age of the sneaker world. It was just incredible.
yeah, yeah. Tell me about that period.
I mean, it was just interesting. Nike had just opened the campus, world campus. I mean, now I think at the time, I could have these numbers wrong, but I think there was 3,500 employees. Now there's over 100,000. Um, but what I loved was it was just, actually, I'll share a quick story. In our onboarding process, which I think this is one of the things most companies miss, is they don't take the time up. They look at onboarding as an expense. It's an investment. It's an investment and can be one of your best investments. But at Nike, I had to go up to Beaverton, Oregon, and be immersed in the Nike culture, product, brand, everything. It was part of onboarding. And it started off with this gentleman, Nelson Ferris, who was the historian. And he just resigned. He was there 50 years, which is incredible. And he got up there, and I'm expecting him to like beat his chest and talk about how great Nike is. And for the first 20 minutes, he talks about all these glorious mistakes that Nike's made over the previous years. And I was like, what? Like, I just loved the sense of humility and honesty in that conversation. And then towards the end, he closed it with like all the momentum and the beauty. I mean, Nike was just coming off Just Do It campaign, and it was like a great time to be there. But the moral of that story was that he gave us all a giant permission slip to play. Like, the whole motto at Nike is create greatness, and whatever you do. And if you said, well, what if I mess up? It's like, just don't do it twice. Like, there's no fear about messing up at Nike. And like, I did some wild stuff, and I look back, I'm like, I can't even believe I did that. But it was such a magical time, and that talk set the stage for me on onboarding, because it was like, all right, I can go out and create, and this is going to be amazing, and I don't have to live in a culture of fear, and worry about repercussions if I mess up somehow. And they gave me the ultimate gift, which was I was empowered.
Yeah, I guess like that's probably the thing that I look at the moment, the parallels in respect to what we see with like the creator economy, for example. I'd love to get your take on like the parallels that we see today, because like a lot of people are questioning the old route of like university. Like I went to university, did a degree, then subsequently did a master's, and I loved it. And I think there is like there's a need for both, but equally I think whatever role you get into, like this is what I love listening to your story about Nike, that ability to empower people and make them like reflect on what the future potentially may hold and articulate a narrative towards achieving that. That's what I'd like to see businesses do more often at this point in time, because we can learn from the past, but there's no future in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of Nike wasn't. It was about like, to me, like, I'll equate it to a great brief at Nike. A great brief at Nike and I actually made this mistake early on when I was in product. I created a brief and I gave it to the designer, and I was working with like one of the best designers, and he read it. And this was, before digital, so it was paper. And he's reading it across the table, and then he very just casually slides it back to me, and he's like, do it yourself. And I was like, what? He's like, you just tell me what to do. Like, you didn't allow for creative expression or freedom in this brief. Like, a great brief should feel like Christmas morning or your birthday, where you're about to get a gift and you don't know what's in that box. You kind of know what you want, but you don't know exactly what's there. And I think my learning lesson it was about not, I always say, don't create magic, create the conditions for magic to happen. And so what does that look like? And the great brief allows for that interpretation, that freedom of expression. But it also empowers the creator to create. What happens a lot of times in creative work right now is it goes through this like milling machine, which is it could be a great brief, could be a great initial work, and then there's like a committee of 25 people that like review it, and then you get done at the end of the day and it's like a watered down drink, and it's like doesn't even resemble the original intention or honor the brief. And I feel cultures that allow the creators to create, like A24 is a mystifying, unique, intriguing brand to me, the film house. And their whole thing is to put the power of the filmmaking in the hands of filmmakers. So you don't have studio execs on set. You don't have it's just like, go create. And so when I see the A24 logo at the beginning of a film, I'm more often than not, I'm like, this is going to be pretty damn good. And they showed at Oscars, obviously they have a pretty effective formula.
Yeah, I guess like that ability to there's two sides of it, I guess. Like looking at where brands develop at this point in time. If you look at things like TikTok, it's quite funny because there's a lot of so-called established brands making a real glaring mistake in what you've just mentioned. That it's kind of over critiqued and over massaged to the fact that it takes all of the soul out of the essence of what the creative product should be. And to me, then it ends up landing as an offering that has no heart, and it misses any form of emotive connection. And I think that, when you really want to connect with people, you have to connect to their hearts. And like that's the crux of a great brand. Like when Nike's movement happened around Just Do It, like they weren't in great shape. Like everybody's seen that movie, right? They weren't in a great shape at the time, but the fact that they were evolving and trying to learn from their mistakes, but equally trying to map out a future that is a lot more prosperous and creative and, clear, I would say, from a vision perspective, and work towards that vision. I think that's the essence of a great brand, the ability to evolve over time, but then equally have the ability to move people on a collective towards a common cause.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good call, Peter. I think if I think about Nike, first of all, nothing survives in stasis. So if you're a company, you create something and just like we're done, you're not gonna, like, law of nature. You always have to adapt and evolve, like to thrive. And it's funny, early in the Nike career, I remember telling my dad, like, this place is so messed up. We're kicking ass. And it's like, and they're changing things constantly. And my dad would be like, what a gift. And at the time, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, he's like, imagine if you went to the same place every day and it never was always the same thing. Like, just relish the fact that this place is teaching you, like, how to adapt and evolve and grow. And I think in many ways, though, at Nike, it wasn't about what was, but it was always this constant kind of understanding and sensing for what could be. And the way it allowed, or the conditions that enabled people to create, was trust. That was such a, I feel like in so many cultures right now, and in fact, leadership for me as a whole in general right now is really interesting. I think trust is this lost vehicle or art, and it's like we don't trust people anymore. And I remember, like, when I joined Nike, I joined as in this revered program called EKIN, and it's Nike spelled backwards. And the whole concept is you're put in the market, and there was like 35 of us around the world, and you were supposed to know the brands forward and backwards. And you were the eyes and ears and voice of the brand. And I was fortunate. I was in Los Angeles. So I was in a major market. My boss was my age. She was in Portland, Oregon. And then the brief was enhance the connection between our brand and this community and focus on women's fitness and running. And I was like, well, what else? And she's like, that's it. Go figure it out. And so here I am, like this early 20-year-old. And I have to say, like, I was ready to run through a brick wall for Nike. I was making just total shit for money. Like, it didn't matter to me. I had something bigger than money. My wealth was that they trusted and empowered me so that I could grow. And then I also felt valued and felt I was providing value. It's just like a really simple thing that I'm like, how can people not understand that within companies? That's just the basic human form. Am I valued? and am I providing value? Like, it's not that hard.
Yeah, it's as you say, like trust gives people freedom, and freedom comes back in terms of value, both to the communities that you serve because the product's great, and then equally to us as individuals because it's like that lovely constant feedback loop.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think once again, it's like they don't teach you that in school. Like, what's the role of trust in business? I'm like, I would say it's everything. It's trust. Think about trust. If you didn't have trust in any relationship, that's not a relationship. There's no connection there. Like, there's a uh, false connection. And I think trust is just this magical chord that allows us to thrive and do things in other ways that we couldn't imagine.
Yeah, totally. I guess like I'm interested as well beyond your time at Nike, diving into like seventh generation and the work that you did there. Like, how did that evolve over time? And Talk maybe through some of the key moments and influences.
So one thing I will say is I did a range of things at Nike. I was in VP of product and of subsidiary. I was in brand. I even was in sales one year. And I really loved and cherished my time there. I met my wife there. So it was like, it afforded me a lot of wonderful things. But I was at this place in my life where I was really in this contemplative mode. And I was like, okay, I can see the next 15 years and they're going to be fun and I'm going to have a good time. But I need to be really uncomfortable again. And one of the things you learn early on at Nike, especially in the EKIN role, is the art of sensing and signals. Like it's this whole body of work where you're just like, don't tell me what is, but tell me like what's happening in a way that could suggest the emerging future. And I was really intrigued at that time about two things: the green movement, and I was really intrigued by corporate responsibility. I had lived through Nike and the labor crisis, which was a less than scintillating moment. Um, and I just was really fascinated. Like, okay, so my wife and I did this exercise on our own and just said, like, all right, imagine a day. What would it look like? What would we want a day to look like? I didn't say title, company, or whatever. And I just drew this picture of like, I want to be in this place that's like, pioneering corporate responsibility and these, leader in the green movement. And lo and behold, like this opportunity for seven generation showed up, which is, for those people who don't know, it's an environmental household product company, which actually was bought by Unilever a few years ago. And it was based in Burlington, Vermont. So I was going back home to where I was in school. So I was like, all right, this is amazing. And I must say, Peter, for me, I got my real education there was I learned the role of soul of business there. And, we were pioneering so many different things. I mean, there was just the transparency piece alone was like, for me, like mind blowing. I remember we created this product, and somehow along the way in manufacturing, a substrate it created an ingredient, or it caused an ingredient that could have been harmful. And so our head of product was like, hey, we just got this back from third-party lab testing. And I remember like we met in a room and it was like literally a 5-minute meeting. It was like, all right, communicate it. Like, what's the communication outreach to everybody and how are we going to pull product back? And I was like, it wasn't even a discussion around anything other than do the damn thing right. Like, transparency is a huge part of our DNA in this movement. And the irony of that moment was we communicated this issue to our community and our business grew. It wasn't like, it's just, once again, that's why like part of the principles I believe in is honesty versus perfection. If you're a company or even an individual and you express what's honest, I would say 8 or 9 out of 10 times people are going to find that incredibly endearing. And so 7th generation for me was just, it was like, it was just a few years of my life where I just learned. I got another MBA, I got an MBA at Nike and I got another one at 7th generation, or maybe I went to like theology school at 7th generation because it was more about that, but it was fun. And it was voted best company on the planet. We grew from 50 to $130 million in 18 months. And it was, the other beautiful thing for me is to work from abundance to scarcity. And so scarcity meaning no resource. Like, we were $50 million, like the brand team, what do you really have? But what I was fortunate, I had an amazing brand team. We were part of this zeitgeist, this movement around green. And what I really learned also in that moment was that constraints are not bad. They're liberating. When you have these things, and if your first reaction is like, oh my God, I only have it. And you look at it from a place of scarcity, then you're kind of hosed. But we're like, okay, this is a challenge, but how do we make this an opportunity? And that was also just really invaluable. Was like, all right, you can't bring a playbook, like from Nike. You got to bring philosophy and principles. And that was just a fun part of that journey.
It makes me think of like I'm from the games industry. Like much of my background of the last number of years has been in computer games, right? So like it makes me think of disruptive innovation and the fact that when industries first start out, like that kind of hotbed of innovation, the fact that you don't, the you don't have the huge pot of money to lean into. So what you lean into then is creativity and innovation. And the interesting part as well, I definitely wanted to touch on was when you talked about the transparency piece, because you see it day in day out by brand at this point in time. No need to call them out; they all know what they're doing. Um,
Right.
but that lack of transparency, like the ability to not be perfect, I agree with. I think this is like people that are trying to do good don't get it right every time. So in that respect, that is why people galvanize and go towards those brands, because they're trying to do something bigger than themselves rather than simply doing something for a profit per se. Like profit is a byproduct of what a true heartbeat of a company should be, and that's a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back. Look at Ben and Jerry's. I mean, I remember them like early on. I mean, they had their small little setup in Burlington, Vermont. They had just moved to Waitsfield, but I think they were really clear from the very onset of what was why they existed beyond just ice cream. And that has really been, I think, a common thread throughout the year. So when they take issues, and they're not afraid to like upset the apple cart, which I actually love. My whole thing is if you don't stand for anything, well, then what do you do? Like that's a
Mm.
hard, or at worst, then you just become like this like hobby brand. Like it's this day of the year, cool. Like let's hop on that day. And I think I love just down the street from me is Patagonia. And so
Yeah,
I hang out with a lot of those guys and a lot of that team quite a bit. And I just I think this is what we get wrong in teaching people about business and culture is that we tend to like really live in this world of comfort and safety. And the irony is I think that is the risk. I think when you live in safety, that is riskier than having a point of view. And so it's just to me, I love and admire those brands and people and individuals that stand for something and then have the courage to lean into it. I mean, Tinker Hatfield, the head of the iconic designer at Nike, always used to have this great quote, and I would put it on my grease board wherever I went, which is, "If people don't love or hate your work, you're not doing work." And I felt in many ways that's like just be bold and like lean into what you believe in, and then see what happens. Like there's a lot of beauty and bounty that comes from that.
yeah, yeah. Like Patagonia's book as well, like Let My People Go Surfing. I was reading that a little while ago, and yeah, I love that journey. The fact that it started essentially out of a group of climbers that just wanted to um, create more quality stuff for themselves, essentially, and then it grew out into what is the amazing brand that we see today. And yeah, I guess like if anybody hasn't read that book or is looking for a really interesting book, that's definitely something to dive into. I also would like to dive into, before we walk onto your philosophy, I'd like to dive into like brands that are inspiring you at this point in time. If you've got any in mind or that come to mind alongside Patagonia, and I guess like why.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation because I think a lot of times when we talk about brands, we live at like the 30,000 foot level in terms of these high altitude brands, big, well known global things. And that's interesting for sure. And I've been a part of that. So, um, but I'm really intrigued by there's another layer down um, of fascinating brands that no one talks about and we can learn from and that are dealing with like a lack of scarcity and they're turning that into abundant. Like there's all these interesting things. So like, for example, I really, really, really love We Present. It's part of We Transfer, and it's basically was created for all things creative. And for lack of a better word, it's a publishing or media house. And I think the work that the editor there, Holly Fraser, I think she's originally from London, what she's done is remarkable. Like, I mean, they won an Oscar for a short. And I think what they've created, and so much of that journey is the beauty of not knowing. You have this idea, like, untold stories of creativity. Well, where's that going to take you? And they just, once again, kind of use that as fuel and nutrition in their journey. And I love, love, love We Present. I think A24, not just how allowing filmmakers to make movies, but I think the way they launch, they're like, there are no rules. They're just breaking every damn rule known to man. I mean, I feel like their social is super whimsical and just interesting, and unique. That's the other thing for me is I just love things that are unique. Um, I also love this brand my dear friend Tina Roth Eisenberg created called Creative Mornings. And so this small idea of bringing designers together is now in like, I'm going to butcher the stats, but like 200 cities and 65 countries around the world. Um, and so I find resonance around these like smaller, lesser known things. I love Tracksmith, by the way. It's a small running apparel company. I think they get the running consumer better than anybody. They created this. It's funny, like it goes against logic, but this just shows in terms of empathy and understanding, like the mindset of who you're serving. They did a film and it was I think an hour and 15 minutes long, and all they did was they filmed a woman running in the winter, parking her car, going for a run, and then getting in her car, set to music. And runners loved it because if you're a runner, you're like, oh, I know that feeling, that sensation, and that, you're on the open road by yourself. And I just felt like that was so well done. And it was just creative. Like the production costs of that were like peanuts, but the creativity, make it simple and make it significant. They did that so, so well. How
Yeah.
about you? What other brands for you out there that you find interesting?
Brands for me are evolving, so I think like I like the group, Night Group, which are responsible for people like Mr. Beast. They're the overarching company that oversees them and the talent agency for them. I think that what they're doing is just amazing. Like Ezra and um, yeah, like phenomenal work. And I think that kind of heartbeat on creativity. I think that the knowledge of what they're trying to achieve. I am actually interested as well in the people like quote unquote influencers transitioning from like YouTube into brand. So like Logan Paul and KSI in the work that they're doing around Prime. Like it's not my type of brand, but I do like the approach that they're taking. So I'm intrigued by that, and I guess like also I love storytelling. So I think brands that understand how to tell stories, that's important for me. And I guess like you can't really mention storytelling without mentioning like production houses like Unit 9. I think what they're doing in respect to really understanding brands and trying to articulate those narratives, yeah, they're really powerful. And but yeah, like for me, I'm all about the disruption. I think that like we can follow a mold, and we can do things as everybody's done before, but I get bored by that. I want brands to like inspire me. I want brands to do something that's not like it could be done before, but like maybe a new twist. And I think
Hmm.
what I think as well in respect to storytelling, like I really want brands to move me. When I see something, I want to be moved. I want to have deep emotional resonance towards what they're articulating and telling me. And so, back to what you said about the 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 runner just like capturing those like footage of like going out on a run and then coming back in, like those things that people can really resonate with, but then like understand the different layers of engagement. So like perfect music that goes with that perfect clip that's set in that such a way. that makes you feel that you're part of that story. Because any
Mm.
brand that can make you feel that you're part of the story, they're the brands that really, they're the brands that have the lasting legacy. And that's the thing. Content now, it's being created by everybody in various different forms, and you know, what are you building? You're not simply building a brand to profit. You're building community, you're building movements, you're building like lasting change. And to me, it has to be interwoven to societal change. Like that's the heartbeat. And I guess, like, this is talking about the philosophy, the human centered part. Like, what is it that your brand exists to do, and what are you doing to achieve that goal? Because we have real two key major problems in respect to people and planet. So how are you as a brand connecting to people, and what are you doing to make sure that future generations inherit a planet that is prosperous, that is full of opportunity, that is, you know, thriving, rather than, this perpetuation of crisis and status quo. Like, we're at a breaking point in my view. So I think that who brands have always been that, I'd say, that cultural heartbeat. So how do you make sure that your brand is part of that movement? That's the intriguing part for me. It's like, you can learn from a lot of people, but ultimately, what is it, is you as a company, what do you want to do? Because anybody that looks through the lens of just profit and make look at quarterly objectives, like, their gaze is too short. Like, you
Mm.
have to look 5, 7, 10 years down the line, and literally become obsessed with the future. Because the more you know about the future, and the more you know about the challenges, the more innovation and solutions can come from that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, and for years, it started in '97, but I fell in love with this thing called biomimicry, and it's how you look at nature, not to learn about nature, but learn from nature. Like, nature is a mentor; it's not a resource anymore; it's a mentor. And over the years, I've collaborated with that group, and I was on the board of the Biomimicry Institute for 8 years or 7 years. And one of the things I realized was we have this model. It's called the natural world that for 3.8 billion years has created the conditions conducive to life. And if our ability to bring in and design our life, and I say design, I'm talking products, organizational structure, everything informed by nature's principles, or which are called life's principles. I think what's encouraging for me is, like, there's a roadmap there. Like, literally, there's a roadmap. In fact, they're working right now on this big project, the Biomimicry 3.8 with Microsoft, on how to not just create, for all of their cloud storage, these huge facilities that are acres and acres. How not to make them look like nature, but how do they ecologically function like nature? Like,
Mm.
that's the thing. And there's models and learning once again in the natural world with how to do that. So I think what's interesting though is we have to quiet as Janine, the founder, would say, we have to quiet our cleverness around that. Like, we need to look at new thinking and new models. Going back to your idea of disruptive, us pretending like we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. Even I was reading that Partha Dasgupta's review, that 600-page review he gave to the British Council. He's the professor at University of Cambridge. If you look at GDP, but you don't look at the extraction of the natural resources as a part of that financial model, you're not. What does he say? I think he says, like, it's like looking at a English football game where you only count how many goals you score, but you never count how many goals against.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, and I think, like, that part of it is, to me, is like, just how do you invite new thinking? I will say this, and you've got young children, mine obviously are young adults now. I'm really intrigued and fascinated, and a little bit in awe of the younger generation. I think they operate and think in a way that's so foreign to how so many other previous generations have thought. And so I do think there's certainly some signals out there that suggest there is something that could be, optimistic and invite possibility, but we got a lot to do. And a lot of it is just, I think, disrupting how we look at business. I mean, this is probably 12 podcast, but if we went into the whole dynamic around just even Milton Friedman and maximizing shareholder return, like if that's the only goal, well, then you know what the output's going to always be. It's not going to be what you want if you're concerned about natural resources, So it's a bigger thing, but I do think there's a lot of brands and people out there that want to do the right thing. There's a lot of brands that present that facade, and it's up for the consumer to decide.
Definitely. And I think it's talking about like the next generation. I think we've just got different motives. It's we're not motivated by profits. We're motivated by legacy. We're motivated by when our time comes, what is our impact? And that's it. And when you have that like driver that you want to drive impact rather than anything else, then what does that look like? How do you shape that? How do you articulate that? And how do you drive movements around that?
Right.
And I think that's a perfect segue into your philosophy, right? Like the blend of human-centered philosophy in respect to business and brand.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've said this many times. I have a great yogi friend who said there's no masters. We're all just learners. And I think over the last 35 years, and being an introvert and high observer, I'm just constantly trying to understand how things work, especially in the world of business and culture. And when I look at it, it was during COVID. I think I had just reached a point where I was like, I can't really take it anymore. I've been in too many C-suites where I just don't want to be a part of it anymore. And so I said, okay, I'm going to finally just share on a whim, like what I believe, these principles. And I call Bonfire With Soul. There's 12 principles. And the whole thing is unlearning business as usual. I actually think we're taught the wrong things. And I'm obsessed really a lot with culture. Going back to our early conversations on trust and empowerment. And so during COVID, I offered up the first cohort of the class in partnership with the Do Lectures. And I thought like 5 people would show, my mom, my wife, my 2 daughters, and maybe a friend. And I did 2 cohorts during COVID, and 1,000 people from 35 countries showed up, which was kind of mind blowing. And I didn't spend a dime marketing it. I just did it. I created it in a way that based on my philosophy. And I took a break, and now I'm going to launch it again in end of September, last Friday of September. But I just find like there's an opportunity for us to once again quiet our cleverness and really like look at what's happening and ask ourselves like, is there another path? And to get there, and my focus is on, once again, don't create magic, create the conditions for magic to happen. What are those things? I don't think financials are a predictor of success. It's doing these other things well. So what are those other things? And that doesn't mean you have to torch the earth to do that. You can do it actually in a really responsible and beautiful way. And so, yeah, I'm an outsider, Peter. I really am. Like, I don't fit into many things. I go into cultures and it's fun. And then I tend to leave, but I just believe, like, let me take a step back. At Nike, you're taught, hey, there's only 2 things you focus on: insight and emotion. Like the rest of the ROI metrics didn't really exist at the time. And so it was like, what's the insight that suggests that this is a good project? What's the emotion you want to create? That was it. And so for me, when I looked at Bonfire, I was working with this amazing human ethnographer, Peter Spear, out of Hudson Valley, New York. And I was like, let's just dive deep in the state of business and culture and everything. And it was really astounding and somewhat tragic and sad to read like the state of culture today around the world in business culture. I mean, 80% of people are not engaged at work. 45% of people wouldn't wish their job on their worst enemy. You know, only 24% people feel like their employer has their well-being in mind. Like there's stress is an all-time high. It's obviously a pandemic in the workplace. You have the University of Exeter study on scary Sundays, then Blue Mondays, and it's like that was foreign to me because I grew up in amazing places for the most part, and so that the insight for me was like the foe in this endeavor is the acceptance of the status quo. Like somebody needs to like I don't know raise their hand and be like, hey, I think there's another way, and so that's why I created this course and this philosophy, and I half jokingly said my goal is to take down Harvard Business School, and um, it's half jokingly because like it's obviously not gonna happen, but I actually do want to challenge the current model of thinking and teaching that happens in the world of business, and so that's it. And once again, it's just 12 unique principles that have guided me. And by the way, what's interesting, the principles that over the years are not informed by business, but they're informed by the natural world, horsemanship, Buckminster Fuller, Jiddu Krishnamurti. All my inspiration comes from things outside of business books, poetry.
That's the thing about the lens, right? If you widen your lens to open up your mind to what other possibilities there are within this amazing world that we live in, then you're not limited. So a lot of people that I speak to, and they read the same books, they swim in the same circles, and like, where's your inspiration coming from if you all have the same mindset? So that, as well as like what we'd mentioned earlier about like disruptive innovation, I think what's failing in culture today is the lack of diversity of thought, the ability to understand it. Like, sorry.
Yeah, no, I said thank you. That's
Right.
it's
Yeah,
spot
like
on.
the ability to understand that, like if you traditional workplaces, right? You finish university, you go into a low end, low pay role. If you're lucky, you get a promotion. You work your way up that ladder, and you may get another promotion. And by the time you're kind of in your mid-20s, you're pushing for being a director. What have you learned? What have you really had the opportunity to step back and reflect on impact? Like, if you work for the same company, what have you learned? And that desire for learning, like the learner's mind, I think is something that if you really want to change a culture, you've got to change the learning. You've got to give people the tools and the opportunity to reshape their thinking, because existing thinking, in my belief, led us to where we are today, and it's led us to a point of change. And what we want to do as leaders, we can pivot or we can stay, and that's the choice that we've all got to make. Do we want to pivot or do we want to stay? And every time history has shown us this moment, the ones that pivot take us forward, and the ones that stay are left behind. And I think history always works in like 80-year cycles. And the only time that it hasn't is this moment of crisis that we've seen, which has gone for about 25 years now. But what happens
Right.
after crisis is kind of like that, you have the fire, and then the phoenix rises from the ashes. You have innovation that is coming through. You can see it in the creator economy. You can see it in the talent pipeline that is there. In akin to what happened with you with Nike, the brief has to be short, and you just have to let them go.
It's like the one thing I want to just double back on is, um, and it's actually part of my course. Like I have a principle, like soil is life. Like the most diverse, the most beautiful, abundant soil that can grow the most amazing things is the most diverse. It's filled with just all these
Yeah.
crazy microbes. And I relate that to your culture at work. like the more diversity of thought you have, the more likely something really interesting is going to emerge. And I think in many ways that tension is a really healthy tension. There's bad tension and there's really good tension. That's a great tension. An example is when I was at Lululemon, it was interesting. I joined in the fall of 2014, and the Wall Street Journal had listed it as the number one brand that would not exist in 2015. In fact, a lot of my friends are like, "What are you doing going there?" But through a lot of different exercises internally, we then decided, all right, we need to find a partner. And we were in Vancouver, Canada. And we said, we need to focus on folks who at that moment were just doing, the Jay-Z real, recognize real. That how do you show up in the most real, honest way? And we partnered with the team from Vice, which this is before it imploded. But back in the day, it was this gritty Brooklyn, diverse, eclectic mix of just characters. And so it was funny when we went to select agencies, there were creative partners, there was all like the known ones. And then there was this Vice group. And you could tell like some people were like, oh, let's go with like, people we're comfortable with. And to the credit of like, I created a small team, we all agreed like, we're going to go with Vice. Like these guys make us wildly uncomfortable, but they bring a diversity of thought to the conversation that we're not surfacing in our own dialogue. And that literally like was the beginning of one of this most amazing turnaround moments for Lou, like what they created and the energy they brought and what we did. And I just think diversity of thought, and Gina Warren, who's one of my favorite people on earth, she led diversity at Nike and she was the head of people and culture at Lululemon. Her point of view, even on DEI, is if you focus on diversity of thought as the driver, more often than not, that will create a diverse culture, because diversity of thought comes from different experiences, different races, different genders, different ethnicities, and you're bringing together a mixture of different people, different individuals. And so anyways, I'm just obsessed with that as a concept because I've lived it where, man, when you invite that in, it is so wonderful. And yet we live a lot of times in just going back to what you said, like it can be a monoculture where things just stay the same the entire time. And then you wake up one day and you're like, wow, we're in crisis mode and we're not going to survive. Like what happened? And it's like, well, you didn't adapt, you didn't evolve, and you didn't bring in this disruptive mindset.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, like diversity of thought's one thing, but I think also the ability to charge people, like emotionally charge them, give them the freedom to operate, remove the fear of failure. Because I think like when brands have the opportunity to really invite creativity into the very essence of what they're doing, then you have the ability to really fail, and you take those learnings of failure and take them forward as lessons, because like there's a sub quest to all this, and this is kind of something that I've heard you talk about, but there's the sub quest is the quest for curiosity. Like if you really want to innovate, and if you really want to change, and if you really want to implement lasting and meaningful change, comes from a period of for an area of curiosity, like, and why this is so important within brand today. So like I think that's a good opportunity to talk about the quest of curiosity and like take your views on it, because I think you have to have a vision for one as to what the future you want to articulate, but that vision has to be curious. It can't be singular focused. This isn't just a sole outlook. Draw inspiration from a multitude of backgrounds and pieces, and put that puzzle together.
Yeah, I mean, there's two points for me in that real quick. One is once again, you got to start by quieting your cleverness. I've worked with CEOs who are like, one was $1 billion behemoth, and they've asked me to come in as a consultant. And the CEO is like, I get paid to have all the answers, and I'm like, I'm not doing this project. Like I've been here a hot second, and I can identify like one of the biggest issues is that you just feel like you have to have all the answers. And so you have to quiet your cleverness and be curious about, where else other solutions could come from. But the other thing is, this is it's connected, but it's kind of a unique way of answering, I think, is when I was at Lululemon, I learned a new way of operating. It was decentralized structure. It's how the natural world operates. And most companies are command and control, right? But I was in this new world where my team was just under 300 people. We were global, and it was decentralized, meaning the team in Asia had the autonomy and the accountability to run the brand in the way that they could. And my goal, what I learned was like, I had to learn a whole new way of leading. I had to create clarity, alignment, feedback loops. My goal wasn't there to be with answers, but I needed to be curious enough to allow others to invite solutions and things that I, once again, could never think of. And hands down, Peter, I loved it. I wish every company was decentralized. It takes leadership moxie, because you got to let go of your ego and you got to be like, all right, I'm just going to, operate in a different way. And also, but it takes curiosity, because you have to let go of one way you've been trained to think and do and invite a whole new other way of operating. And like, we were launching Lululemon Asia at the time for the first time. And I just remember, like, I'm in Vancouver. I don't know anything about the Asian market, and the Asian market is so huge. I mean, what happens in Beijing is different than Seoul, which is different from Tokyo. Like, they're all so unique in these little micro cultures, and they crushed it. They were like amazing. And so, yes, there are those moments where like there's something happens where it's not great, but that's such a small fraction of the time. The vast majority of the time, people deliver beyond expectations. And that, by inviting my own curiosity into the conversation, it invited others to be empowered and create in a way that if I taught a business school, I would be like, just be decentralized. Have the courage to create a decentralized structure and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's crazy, because from a learning perspective, we're taught a set way, but then only when you face challenge and controversy and like a little bit of suffering as well, do you really have an opportunity to reflect. Like, there's that Ray Dalio quote about pain plus reflection equals progress, and I think that you do have to have that element of pain to reflect upon things that you've done in order to progress. But then once you've opened that kind of door, that's a door that doesn't get closed. Like, what you then subsequently a lot more open to where that next avenue may take you. So that curiosity element and that learner's mind, I think that ultimately then shapes the journey that you go on subsequent to that period of pain. And there's a lot that you can be drawn towards the parallels of that post-traumatic, people talk about post-traumatic stress, but there's equally post-traumatic growth. It's looking at challenge. And a while ago we chatted to Lisa Miller, and she talked about depression and awakening, but two sides of the same door. And that's the thing. It's the same with like pain and progress. It's two sides of the same coin. But ultimately, once you've flipped it and once you've be it a door metaphor, once you've opened the door per se, then you are a lot more curious. And I'd be interested to understand how curiosity has shaped you personally and also professionally in both your personal and professional life, because like we are kind of mavericks in that respect, that we don't fit within a grain, but equally that's a good thing, because we look at things in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think being an introvert, quasi ambivert, I just am like high observant mode all the time. I'm just trying to understand. I also love the concept of learning. Like, I'm taking a poetry class right now. It's kicking my ass. But I'm really curious about the role of language in the world. And I think poets can speak, they can cut through the barbed wire of life like nobody's business. And so I'm like, I need to learn poetry, but it's a formal poetry class. So it's like the rigor around it is crazy. But as just someone who has this insatiable thirst for learning, I think that you then are like get into observation mode, and you're like, like, hey, what's happening? What are the signals? What am I sensing? And so when I make decisions in life, like when I went to Lululemon at a time when it was literally at its darkest days, I wasn't going there because I loved black stretchy pants. I was going because I felt like the mindfulness movement was something that was really interesting. That's why I was going. And I felt there was an opportunity for that brand to capture that as an idea and a concept in a more, a bolder manner. And so curiosity is for me, I mean, that's why at the beginning of the questions, I always struggle like to say, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. I do a lot of things. Like, I mean, I teach, all these other things, but I led do lectures. I've never even ran an event. I couldn't even hold a dinner party. I didn't even know how to plan a dinner party. And yet somehow I felt like I could co-host and co-curate 150 people annually from around the world. Like, but I was like curious. I was like, no, I think this is really interesting. I want to figure this out. And I think what you also learn, just like nature doesn't do anything by itself. It's relying on others for collaboration. And so my thing was like, all right, who else do I need to invite to collaborate to make this a success? And, but yeah, the curiosity piece for me is it's a little bit like trust. It's like, I think in life, we go through life and there's just this door in front of us and we're like, that's my path. But the reality is I think there's all these other doors that are left and right that we never see. And that curiosity, all of a sudden, when we allow that to invite that into our lives, like all these other doors start to open up, which I think is the beauty of the most adventures.
Yeah, I think that's what we kind of need from brand, just that ability to just be wise to the fact that if you open your eyes, there's a world of possibility out there in respect to how you can evolve a brand and how it can change a journey and shape a journey. And I think like some brands, they may start out on a set footing, but then it doesn't mean they can change. They don't have the ability to not change down the line. And I think that's always the power of change, that like change is the only constant. And
Mm.
if you look at where we as people and also professionally, where businesses and brands are evolving, like you always have to, like it's about riding the waves of the seas of change rather than kind of be swept over by them. And I think that kind of there's an element of one of the things I definitely wanted to chat to you about was about things like the sustainability brand, because similar to when you were talking about corporate social responsibility early doors, like since the pandemic, there has been a movement towards purpose, a movement towards sustainability, and I guess like rather than it becoming a coining of a term, how do you feel brands should utilize this moment to evolve for the future?
Well, I mean, I think any great brand will always adapt and evolve because they're attuned to what's happening within the world and their culture, and the culture not being their culture, but the culture as a whole, the global culture or community culture. I don't know of any how you can look at the world right now and not ask yourselves, all right, how is our business, or what are we doing in our business in a way that would minimize or even hopefully optimize a more regenerative play versus just what we're doing. And I think the other thing is it's kind of like DEI and sustainability for me are like, I think the model's broken. I think when those things are embedded in your core,
Yeah.
you can do it really well. When it's an adjunct box as part of an org, there's a sustainability group and then there's like a DEI group. I think that looks pretty on paper. I'm not sure how effective that is versus, when I was part of Seventh Generation, the idea of sustainability was at our core. So everything we did, we had that in mind. But mind you, it wasn't like we were crushing everything, but at least our intention and our awareness was a part of that. And so it wasn't about, having a sustainability department. And I feel like the best brands will realize that pretty quickly. Like, here's an example. When you talk about turnarounds, Anderson Carpet was one of a huge carpet company based in Atlanta, Georgia. And then Ray Anderson read one of Paul Hawkins' books. I can't remember which one. Oh, Natural Capitalism. And he said it was the spirit of his chest. He literally transformed the entire company around being a sustainable organization in a way that they crushed it. He said, we have 7 years, Mount Sustainability. Here are the metrics. Here's what we're going to do. But that worked because it was literally like the heartbeat of the brand. And I feel like the best brands going forward will acknowledge that it needs to be not just, you know, an adjunct piece or a separate piece of the business. It needs to be the business, and we'll see where it goes. But yeah, I guess that's where I once again I just think it's a fundamental philosophical shift on how to approach it inside a company and where it sits and how it sits.
Yeah, exactly. It's essentially, I've always termed it as being like the lifeblood of an organization. So if you look at, an organization akin to the human body, like what is your heart? What is your blood system? What, how is all of the work that you're doing interwoven to make sure that you're moving forward as a collective? Because like you're right, when people sub it off into we have a sustainability policy, or we have this like small part of a division, or what, like they're missing an opportunity. And like there is going to be an involvement of roles, like in how companies go about executing and focus, but it has to be interwoven. It's the heartbeat, it's the soul, it's the very essence of what a brand becomes. Like, when I started out with Purpose Made, like, why did I start Purpose Made? It's because I'm really concerned about the future, and I have 3 kids under the age of 3, and I do not want them to inherit the world that we have at this present point in time, because I see the challenges, but B, and this is a massive B, I see the breadth of opportunity. And one of the points that I'm often asked upon is the element of like, well, yeah, you can see all these opportunities, and disruptive brands are an amazing thing, and or we can leave it to the generation to follow. But what do we do with these big behemoths that need to make their revenue forecasts in order to kind of like please their shareholders? Or what can we do with these big brands that can't pivot? And I think that what we do with those big brands is we we change the outlook of their leaders. Like that, I think, when big brands are questioning, yeah, but what can we do? Like, should they really be in charge of big brand? I don't think so. I think it needs to be there needs to be a real moment of, like, at the beginning of this conversation we talked about, like, there's an element of stoicism in there, and we talked about ancient Greece, and then but equally, like, one of the elements that really impacts me at this point in time is the Renaissance. And I look at the Renaissance moment, and I look at that as they were they were literally focused upon how do they make communities, society, better, richer, more optimistic, more hopeful, that what the future outlooks may be. And this is kind of why I think that we are in this moment of a digital renaissance now. Like, you look at the creator economy, and they don't care about existing plays. They're ripping up the rule book, and they are changing the landscape in front of brands at the moment. So big brands that we see today, yeah, like, I'm not going to say that they're going to disappear in 5 years, but man, they have to evolve, because, like, they're missing an opportunity, and the opportunity is the fact that we can be so much more than we are presently. And it's we have to really motivate people to believe that they can achieve more than they're achieving at this point in time, and understand that, like, it isn't about short-termism. It's not about, like, what like, to that carpe diem. It's not about seize a day. It's about seize a year,
Mm.
and then those 1% incremental increases year on year, day on day. So you're always improving, always evolving, because when you create individuals like that, they create clusters of people like that. They create communities that are like that, and it grows and grows and grows and grows. And before you know it, the world's most pressing problems that we face, they're never going to get solved by an individual. They have to be solved by all of us. And like, it's about motivating people. It's about showing them a brighter, more optimistic future. And yeah, like I think that where we are now, like the biggest lesson is just belief, real understanding that like we can achieve anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I just want to go back to like biomimicry. I think we can look at it as every challenge you can look at as a threat or an opportunity. And I feel like there's an amazing opportunity. And so to me, the opportunity is one to galvanize, in particular, the Gen Z, who I just marvel at as a collective. Um, I think to create a vision of what could be. So, like when you're just looking at the day to day, it's hard to snap yourself out of something. And I think the ability to invite a new vision for like what the world could look like or how we could operate would be, to me, I always think of vision as such a key piece. It allows people to see, feel, and trust what's
Mm.
possible. Um, and then it's a bigger question, but then I think, there just needs to be an invitation to disrupt kind of like how we do financial modeling. Like I don't until we if until we address some of those things, you're always going to have, if we're going to measure success by GDP and GDP is absent of natural resources, then that's not, I don't know what we're measuring holistically. So it's just, to me, it's like a systems approach around all these things, but there are encouraging things. And I come from the Nike world, which was all about, bring inspiration to people's lives. And I feel like that to me would be, Maya Angelou would say, you never solve anything by hate. I don't want to like jump on the hate dower, we're
Yeah,
screwed mentality. I get it. I understand why people can get there. But I feel like we have to bring forth this inspired protagonist point of view. And that actually can start as consumers. Consumers decide. So I think a lot of consumers can decide how they want to commit their spend or how they spend or who they associate with going forward, and that does have an impact. So
yeah. It's back to what you said about Friedman. Like at the end of the day, the focus at that point was about shareholder value, but like now, um, sorry, stakeholder. We are all vested stakeholders in organizations, so like we have a choice. That is the beauty of choice. We have the ability to support brands that we believe in, and we have the ability to distance ourselves from those that we don't. And only when like some of these rude awakenings occur, then can we, like brands can maybe wake up. But it does, it's not about, like, I agree, it's not about the hate. Like, we live in a world of pseudo populism. We do not need the polarization to continue. It is about optimism rather than skepticism. It's about trust and transparency and openness, and like an embracement of the world and all its beauty to kind of thrive. And I think that, like, it's about connecting the dots and, giving people belief that they can achieve their dreams. And I think that when you can do that within an organization, like, that's when cultures really start to pivot, because, like, you give people freedom. The ones that face the perpetuation of challenge and crisis is because they they maybe don't learn the lessons of the past. Then they're not looking at those lessons as learnings. They're looking at those lessons maybe without the reflection that's needed. Like, they're still seeing that as pain rather than an opportunity to progress. And I think that that's something that companies have to set right with themselves. Like, if I'm going into, like, lead a big international company today, and my kid's growing up and he's asking me questions about what I'm doing with said company, like, surely that has given you the heartbeat that, maybe that we could be doing more. And that's what it's about. It's about opening that gaze. Like, I've seen some companies recently, they've brought in things like youth boards, where they're basically putting people from the generations to follow and giving them an opportunity and a platform to articulate to that business, like, why are you doing that, or how are you doing that, and what's the impact of that? And these questions that, like, they may seem as like a bit of a curveball, but like that diversity of thought that we were chatting about before, like that's really, like, that's what we need. And you know that's what I hope businesses, rather than like, because there's always been that traditional thing of close your door, like close your door to your competitor, like don't let them see what you're working on, or don't do this, or competition. But like, it should be about collaboration. Like, what is so wrong with like opening up your door to your your competitors, to your community? At EA, when we were going through a period of transition with some of the games that we delivered, we weren't getting the best of feedback from our community in respect to the titles that we're bringing out. So we changed, and we brought our players in house, and we showed them at the very early stages of a creation of a game, like, this is what we're working on. What's your feedback? What's your thoughts? Like, you're going to be one of the guys that play it, or the girls that play it. Like, give us your insight. And that changed very much and evolved what we see in respect to influencer marketing today. And like, if you have the ability to not only engage with community, but bring them make them part of a journey, like, that's where you're going to see some real innovation, in my opinion. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Janine Benyus says it really well. Once again, the founder of Biomimicry. We did a podcast together a few years ago, and she said success is different for business than it is for the natural world, and in terms of the mechanisms for how you operate. In business, it's a solo journey. To your point, you close doors and you just like battle it out and you figure it out. In nature, everything is a collaborative endeavor. Nothing in nature survives by itself. And that's why I get animated around biomimicry and the natural world, just because I'm like, there's so much learning that literally is right outside our door. And yet we just refuse, for whatever reason, to like be inquire, like, intrigued by, well, how does this work? But the notion of collaboration, it's once again, it's a guiding principle, and it's one of the distinct reasons why the natural world flourishes. It creates conditions conducive to life, and one of the principles is about fostering collaboration.
Definitely. We've talked quite a bit about elements touching around the borderline of the future, but like, in your respect, what does the future hold in respect to brand for the next 2 to 3 years, and maybe further afield in respect to like it's hard to predict down the line of 10, but what do you feel the future trends that are going to come to light, and also what's the impact in respect to the brands of the future, and how do they evolve?
Well, maybe I'll answer about what I'd like to see. um, I would love to see a gigantic shift in leadership, just in terms of philosophy and how to run a business. I think I could wax poetic around all these stats, but the status quo needs to be challenged for a lot of different reasons. Like small thing, like, we pride ourselves on being busy all the time, but yet studies have shown that science has shown that when we do nothing, we're our most creative. So by like maxing out people's times, we're not allowed to be creative. So why not afford people the space and pace to do work that allows for that creativity to emerge? So I just would love to see a fundamental shift on what leadership looks like going forward, in brands. I don't, I think you'd be hard pressed to be a relevant brand in the future if you're not addressing what's happening in the world today, especially around just environment and climate. I mean, I think I told you it's going to be like 54 Celsius in Death Valley on Saturday, which is like an hour and a half for me. It's crazy, which is 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I think and this goes back to don't make it an adjunct ancillary piece of your business, making it the heartbeat of your business, and you can do it the right way. Um, and then I actually think, it's funny. We, I don't know what it's like for you all, where you all live, but in our studies in university, we spend so much time focusing on macro, like macro politics. I think micro is going to take on a much bigger role for brands. And what I mean by that is, I think just um, being far more local, like your ability to actually be locally relevant, not just globally relevant, is going to be important. Because every culture and community is different, and so you can still bring like you know the solid piece of who you are as a brand, but then I think you have to somehow customize that at the local level to make sure that it's localized and relevant for that marketplace. Um, but yeah, those are a few of the things I'd love to see. And I just love smaller things. I'm not interested in large S. I'm more interested in like smaller, medium-sized brands that are inviting different ways of operating.
What's your opinion on like the future of storytelling and like emotive storytelling, I guess, in respect to brand?
I learned early on at Nike, and it's not for everybody, but it's funny that Apple adapted it and obviously worked well. But great brands, there's rational and there's emotional. Rational is I'm going to create a great product. Even better, I'm going to create a great, unique product. Emotional is then I'm going to bring a feeling to that. I'm going to infuse it and bring this emotional wrapper. In fact, Scott Bedbury, who was the CMO at Nike when I was there early on, would always say, God forbid any company that thinks its product is wider, brighter, faster, and stops there, because where you see greatness, the customer sees parity, and parity is parity, not parity as like the concept. And I just think storytelling it's it's the oldest human art form is storytelling. It's the way we connect with people. It's the way we get people to see, feel, and trust what we're doing, especially when it's done from a really authentic manner. It's why I'm taking this poetry class. I'm really, really, really intrigued by the role of language. David White, the poet, says the language of business today does not speak to the larger territory ahead. I think he's right. We talk in these like insane terms: capture, acquire, target. It's like a military operation, and it's like, how do you change the language in a way that's, I think, just more accommodating, but also just more inviting. But storytelling is huge. It's once again, it's been a part of human existence. Yeah. So it's a massive piece, and I just don't think people truly understand it. That's the other piece. It's more than just the formal structure of, protagonist, antagonist, narrative, story arc. There's a lot of other elements in there that, for me, like empathy and other things that are key piece of that.
I think like it's about changing the way people think about the world. I think, and that comes across in anything that we do. It's like storytelling. This is why I love computer games, because like in games we have anything from 40 hours plus with a player if they're playing a campaign, or even longer if they're just online. But let's put it to like a story, a single player story mode. Like we have a opportunity to like weave a tapestry of intricacies in there that draws people to really be moved and feel, and not like that's the same opportunity I think is there for brand if they are willing to take it. It's that ability to really deeply connect with people, and yeah, like when when you can move people, that's what you remember. You remember those moments. You remember what you did at that point in time. This is why I think, similar to like music, being a cultural force, like just the understanding that like the stories that we tell, they they can be so much more intricate if we really want to dive into it. And that's what I want to see more from brand. I want to see that like that level of depth and detail that, like it's not just simply about meaning and motive. This is what the cause that we're going to press down upon. This is why, akin to Simon Sinek. But like the how and the depth of detail is like what I'm intrigued to see evolve over the next coming like few years ahead. Like I could continue and talk to you all day. Like it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, man. I guess like to close out, I've got like two questions. One being like, what is some of the major influences or things that's drawing your gaze at this point in time? And I guess like the second question is, like, what are the key thoughts and takeaways that you'd like to leave with our audience?
So right now, like, once again, I gravitate towards what I'm curious about. I have this poetry mission, so I have no idea where this is going to take me, but I'm committed to it, and so I'll let you know in 8 weeks how that goes.
Yeah.
I think other things that I'm really intrigued by right now, I I'm really fascinated the way Rick Rubin is operating and navigating through the world, the music
Yeah.
producer.
Yeah, man.
Um,
I love Rick Rubin.
he's literally going against the grain of conventional logic that we're taught, and I absolutely love it. And so I'm curious how we can invite more of that into the world, because I think his model and way of being is proving that it can be highly successful, especially from a creator's point of view.
Have you read the Creative app?
Um, I've got it right here. I've
I
got it
love
in
that book.
hand. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Um, so like Rick Rubin, obviously, he's once again, even the thing. I'm a huge fan of breath, like the beauty of
Yeah,
breath, and
yeah,
the way he brings breath into conversation. I think is I just love it. It makes people so uncomfortable. They're like, wait, what? I got to breathe first. And then the natural world. I just can't get enough of the natural world and learning about that. So I have this endless fascination around just learning as much as I can about the natural world,
mm,
and biomimicry. And I think the takeaways for me are, um, it's okay for us to unlearn. I think as we go along in life, we feel like we have to learn, and then we can't let go of that. I mean, it's like, and then we're like, okay, we're done learning. But I think for me, the what I feel grateful for is that I've just been around people that have reinforced and supported me in my desire to unlearn constantly along the way. And I feel like if we want to get to that place where for your kids and my kids and future generations, we need to unlearn what we've learned and invite that as, quiet or cleverness. I can't say that enough. And just be uncomfortable. There's a good podcast I was listening to recently called The Comfort Crisis.
mm,
For some reason, we think uncomfortable is bad. Uncomfortable. I had a great mentor who said, when you're uncomfortable, it's one of the few times you're growing. So make yourself uncomfortable. And I guess that would be the other takeaway, is like uncomfortable is it's a good thing. And it should be embraced. Give it a big hug.
yeah. Well, like just lastly, how can people get in contact with you if they want to reach out, or if they want to kind of see the work that you're doing? And obviously, you said the launch of the work in September.
Yeah, so I'm going to launch Bonfire with Soul. There'll be more communication coming from that next month. The best way to just follow me or connect with me, and I'll follow you, is on LinkedIn. I keep my Instagram private just because it's more for me, like just a private thing. And but LinkedIn for me is probably the easiest way. And then bonfirewithsoul.com will be updated next month, but you can go there as well if you want to learn more about the course.
Yeah, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really, really chuffed that we had the opportunity to speak. And yeah, man, I'll definitely be keeping tabs. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, Peter, delighted to be a part of this convo with you, man. Thank you. I appreciate what you do and and the work you're creating.